If you were listening a couple weeks ago, you would have heard me say how happy I was that one of my friends emailed me and was thinking about me when it came to a poetry contest. I think I also mentioned in that episode that I was going to have her on to talk about her upcoming fantastic book, which I have been honored enough to get the chance to read. So I have my dear friend Amelia here with me today.
Hi, Jenna.
Hi.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad that you're here. And I'm really glad for all of you out there that you get to speak with her, because I think you'll see pretty early on that she carries with her this very peaceful, healing, inspiring presence. And I don't think I've told her this yet, but actually when I was working next to her at the writing center that we both go to, I was definitely more focused. She's the type of person who makes you want to kind of level up and be your best. And I'm so glad that she gets to share those gifts with you today.
Oh, thank you, Jenna. That's really lovely.
You're welcome. So first things first, before we start talking about your book and the inspiration for it, I want to ask you the two questions I ask all of my guests. And the first one is, what is something that bugs you?
Something that bugs me are door-to-door pesticide salespeople. So the people who come to your door and they're offering what they call lawn service, which can mean lots of things, but they mean putting chemicals on your yard. Yeah. And it's always done in this sort of way where it feels like they're offering you something, but it's always like kind of a negative connotation. Like they're like, I've noticed there are a lot of weeds in your yard and you could use our service. And what I always have to say to them is, well, I don't use pesticides on my yard on purpose, actually, because my yard is for the bees. And they kind of give me this look like, what?
The bees.
The bees. And then they're like, well, surely you don't want pest bugs. And then I go into this long rant about how our ecosystem is better if we don't try to control it using poisons. And then they get the hint and usually leave by then. But I hate the sort of shade of it all, of like, I noticed your yard looks really crappy. Yeah. And maybe I can offer some help.
Yeah, would you like some poison? Because that's the best antidote. Oh, yeah. I can relate. And as someone who also loves plants and letting things be, pun intended, I guess, I can appreciate that. But those guys can get really pushy though too.
It's so annoying, and they're always like 21 years old, and I'm sure
they're kids
drinking the Kool-Aid of whatever chemical company they work for. But it drives me a little bit crazy.
And they're here a lot, and it's kind of like here in the Midwest, it's the season for that. It's spring. Yes. People are remembering that green things exist, so they're they're outside. They're tending to their yards. So yeah, I can relate. I don't like that either. Well, okay, so how about something that you love?
Okay, so my something I love is very related to the thing that bugs me.
Oh.
The thing I love are bees. And in particular, taking care of them. It just does my heart so much good to go out into my yard or sit at my window and look out at the little native flower patch I have in my front yard and hear and see the bees. It really... no matter what is going on in my life or the world, it helps me to know this bee is trying to do its job, and I can help it a little bit by planting food for it. And so that's the thing I love is gardening in my yard and kind of doing it in a way that benefits the ecosystem.
That's really beautiful. And I think even the local governments now are starting to try to protect pollinators. So,
absolutely.
I mean, they're important for so many reasons, and you have a unique and beautiful connection to them. But I'm glad that, the city is starting to catch up a little bit. Like, hey, let's protect these, these pollinators. I'm glad that, of course, it would always be better if people were more proactive than reactive, but still something's being done to kind of help protect them and things like that. So that's really great. And I love, and my listeners know this, they're probably noticing a trend of my having guests on who also love plants and the earth. But we talk a lot on this podcast about just the healing power of nature. And I think more and more Americans especially are starting to kind of wake up to that, because the science is, catching up with ancient medicine of just the power of nature, growing things, creatures of nature such as bees. So I really appreciate that you included that, because it is incredibly powerful and transformative. And
I think as a writer too, I love the rich metaphors that are available to us through learning about nature. Yes. I think it's Adrienne Marie Brown in her Emergent Strategy book talks about this concept of fractals and how there are miniature things in nature or macro things in nature that we can then apply to our lives or to systemic problems. And so noticing, for instance, how does nature take care of a poison, or how does it decompose something that is not benefiting the ecosystem, and then how can we learn from that in our own work? Yes. So that's something I love exploring, and I find it's sort of both a spiritual practice, and in writing it just helps me with metaphor, helps me explain things.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, as human beings, we were meant to be connected to the earth and nature. And again, people are rediscovering that. Actually, in one of my recent episodes, it's called The Straw and the Oak Tree. And I read Varla's Enchanted Plants book. Amelia also knows Varla Ventura. Yes. And I thought it was really interesting that straw has no seed. And so I used that as a metaphor for false narratives that are told about us, because the whole episode was about letting go of the negative comments and false narratives that people have about you. And so I used this kind of metaphor of the straw as a seedless thing that in the right hands can be turned into gold or used for, productive things like mats and baskets and things like that. But in the wrong hands, it just kind of falls dead on the ground. And so we talked about that. And then in comparison to the oak tree, we talked about something that has a very powerful seed and grows tall and represents, wisdom, leadership, and is very connected and protected by nature spirits. And so I kind of compared those two, and, eventually at the end of the episode talked about what is straw to an oak tree, eventually by focusing on the seeds and the things that give you roots, you grow tall and strong enough to just let these empty things kind of go at your feet. And so anyway,
I love that.
I'll have
to go listen to that episode.
Yeah, it was a really fun one to record. And I share with my listeners that teachers often teach what they need to learn, and that's kind of what I do in this podcast. And that's kind of a good connection for what I wanted to ask you, because I'm more of a fiction writer. I don't write a whole lot of nonfiction. And so one thing I've loved learning about Amelia is how to write nonfiction, more autobiographical type things. And so I'm really excited that my listeners get to learn from you, because that's a different world for me. So I'm excited to learn more about your process with nonfiction. Yeah. So on that note, can I just ask you why you wanted to write your book? And has your motivation changed, as you've gone on to write it?
Yeah, what a great question. I think the answer for me is I felt very haunted by some of these stories that I tell in my memoir. They were hard experiences, things like birthing during a nursing crisis, or nursing strike, excuse me, or, dealing with a neighbor who was stalking and harassing me. I needed a way to figure them out, and not that I was going to come up with a reason it all happened, but I needed to make meaning of it for myself. I had a writing teacher, because I've always been drawn to memoir as a way to explore myself and understand my own life. I had a teacher say, the best material to write about for memoir is something that you haven't figured out yet.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you have something in your life where it's kind of wrapped, you know how you think about it, it's actually not the thing to explore. The thing to explore is the thing you still have questions about.
Wow.
And so I decided to tackle the things I still had questions about. And what I found was that the insight was very surprising to me. Often, maybe in the first draft, it might express itself as a lot of anger or bitterness. And I think I had to, like the stages of grief, kind of move through that in the drafting process. But eventually, what was surprising to me was that I found more nuance as it went on. And that's how I knew I was getting to a greater truth, was not when maybe there was kind of a victim or perpetrator sort of dichotomy, just bare bones, but rather there was nuance to it, that I could see the context and see where there was real harm, because I'm not trying to excuse someone's harm, but also understand that it existed in a context of lots of harm and people being treated to treat others with harm. So people being taught, rather, to treat people with harm. So that was the surprising thing that came of it, that maybe I started with anger and came to a level of acceptance of the narrative or what had happened. So, yeah.
Thank you. And maybe I should add, to help my listeners a little bit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I love about Amelia's book is that, as she shared, she's writing about, stories that she still needed to figure out, but kind of the overarching theme is surviving and healing from domestic abuse, which my listeners know is a subject very near and dear to my heart. And what I love about your story, though, is exactly what you touched on. You didn't just talk about the one relationship. You talked about the overarching, issues related to sexism, even as it's tied to being stalked by your neighbor, or the messages that we are told as young girls and teenagers about our worth and about what we're capable of. Even as we're proving otherwise, we're still told, no, you're not. And, you even go into some of the family, the ties, and how sometimes certain cycles are in our DNA. And so, to help you out, those of you who are listening, that's kind of what her book is about. It's this beautiful collection of stories of her life, all kind of dealing with, how did I end up in this abusive relationship? What are all the connecting chords? How do I heal, and how can I use that journey to help others? And I think you did such a beautiful job of explaining how you arrived, because that's such beautiful advice from your writing teacher, to write about something you haven't figured out yet, because that journey comes through in your story. And as a fellow writer, I can 100% agree when in the stories, although they're fictional, that I've wrote based on my own journeys, I was in the thick of it. I didn't fully understand everything yet. All I knew is that I needed to speak about these things and to put them somewhere, or else they were gonna just master me. So thank you for what you shared about how and why you wanted to write it. I'm so grateful that you answered that call.
Thank you, Jenna.
And then I wanted to talk to you about the title too, because I feel like that's also a good introduction. Are you okay with talking
Absolutely.
about the title? So Amelia's book is called Surrender, and I really want to know, how did you come up with that, and maybe what is the symbolism behind it?
Sure, absolutely. So I came up with the title Surrender as a nod to the Serenity Prayer. So I'm part of a 12-step community called Al-Anon. For folks who aren't familiar, Al-Anon is a community where people who have loved ones who are struggling with addiction can come and get their own support and kind of understand their own role in codependent relationships with somebody struggling in addiction. And I needed that community at a number of points in my life, but what I find really beautiful about the serenity prayer, and that's the thing you hear where people say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I have found that in many of the grief periods of my life, I had to surrender to whatever was happening. Not that I didn't have my own choices in it, but to know that I couldn't control these things. And that was one of my coping strategies early on that I learned over time was not serving me. So I was trying to control my body, for instance. I struggled with disordered eating in my teenage years, and that was kind of how I was dealing with stress, but it was not good for me ultimately. Trying to control a partner who's using drugs and alcohol, that wasn't serving me either, because I had no control over that person's decisions, and it was driving me crazy to try to control that. And so surrender is really about understanding my grief experiences and also being able to put them into context and say, I can't control what happened to me, but I can control my response and how I move forward and act differently, so that hopefully I can grow, to use that garden metaphor, grow the things I want in my life to be able to better live and better recover from those experiences.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And again, like most of your writing, all of that comes through even in something as simple, seemingly simple as the title. It's like, oh, this is referring to a journey. This is referring to acceptance, but also growth, and I think your book absolutely reflects that. It's amazing that you brought up the serenity prayer, because that can reach so many people for so many things. I think sometimes people think, oh, that's only for the people in Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon, but I've actually been reciting it to myself quite a bit lately, because it all comes back to some of those false narratives that I was talking about. There's just, when you're dealing with difficult people or a serious situation, it can be really hard to deal with the nerve, of some people and what they're willing to say and do to destroy you.
Absolutely.
Or even just false perceptions about you that can just drive you crazy. Especially if you are vulnerable like we are and you put your work out there, I mean, it has so many layers of things that we might be vulnerable to that people would say about us, whether it's about our work or our personal life or just whatever. And so I've actually been reciting that prayer as a way to let go of the things that I can't control. Because like you, I've had my own struggle with needing to control certain things, and man, it's hard to rewrite some of those programs.
But
it's
kudos
worth
for trying. I think, and unfortunately in life we get a lot of practice in how to handle things that are outside of our control. I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, I would go for these walks on my lunch break because, I was working from home like a lot of us were at the time. And I would stomp, just be angry, right? That all of this was happening and it was outside our control and we couldn't see people anymore. And I would be yelling, not yelling, but sort of muttering under my breath, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And as I went on the walk, the prayer would get calmer. But there were just days where I just had to stomp it out,
That actually seems like a really beautiful way to deal with that. You know what I mean? Because we all have anger. It's going to happen. But I actually think that's a really healthy way of dealing with it. So that's, the world does not help us out when it comes to control.
It sure does not. No.
So the next thing I was wondering about, it's even fun to say. So the genre of your memoir is technically speculative memoir. Can you help our readers understand what that means?
Absolutely. So speculative memoir is a form that takes maybe an imagined reality or a magical reality and weaves it in with a narrative to kind of make sense of it. So in my book in particular, I braid 3 narratives. One is the experience of the trauma of sexism and all that wrought on my life. And then another braid of the memoir is kind of reckoning with the epigenetics of addiction, whether that's in my family history, and then kind of how that played out in my relationships with people, and then coming to some ancestral healing as well. And then I also imagine, and this is where the speculative piece comes in, an allegory of sorts. And that is a narrative throughout the book. I imagine myself as a deer as my past self. And then there's also a character of a she-wolf, and the she-wolf is my present and future self. And they journey together through their ecosystem and encounter dangers together, get harmed, and then kind of come to some sense of safety and security. And that was a way to explore the trauma of my experience, but not have to trot every detail out. You know, it was a way to kind of let my brain say, well, what would be a restorative way that you could deal with this? As I was writing the book, I think the first draft really had to be the pain story, right? I had to get it all out. And then I understood in holding that entire manuscript that's not what I ultimately wanted the book to be. I needed it to be a little more transformative, more restorative, because that's how I feel now. I feel more healed, and I wanted the book to reflect that. I didn't want it to just be kind of one story after another of how I experienced harm in my life. I wanted there to be that healing element, and really with that deer and she-wolf, I was able to say things in a way that didn't have to be exactly how it happened, because that didn't necessarily happen, but it was a way to reflect kind of the more restorative ways I think about my life.
That is so beautiful and powerful, because I think one of the most healing things when it comes to trying to find ourselves after going through the trauma of caring for someone with addiction or trying to recover from abuse is to recognize that we are human beings of depth. And as much as we feel like we've been sort of dominated and suppressed by whoever, you know, may have been abusing us or whoever was struggling with addiction, I think connecting to the magical and seeing all the ways that we are connected to the healing things of this earth is huge. And so I love that you used, you know, the metaphor of the deer and the she-wolf, because it's like it tells you of your own divinity. It tells you of how beautiful and strong you are in the midst of some of the worst moments of your life, immediately following them, and then, you know, on your healing journey. It really kind of bridges that connection. And again, I can relate to just incorporating, we love magic on this show, but it really is powerful and transformative. And I think, you know, personally, one of the main reasons, you know, I 100% agree with, well, because also it's kind of science backed, but like with, you know, your points about DNA connections to addiction and the culture of sexism and how all that plays together. But I think another reason many of us end up in either abusive relationships or just lives that don't really match our hearts is because we feel very disconnected, you know, from who we are and from the beauty around us. Even though it's right there, it doesn't feel like it's right there. And I don't think we were born that way. I think all the lies of the world tell us that. I mean, you know, is it okay if I talk about the push-ups story from your book? So one thing I loved about Amelia's book is she told this story of an experience that she had at a church youth group in middle school, right? Where there was this push-up contest, and they were trying to see how many of the students could, or how many push-ups they could do in like a minute. Is that what it was?
Something like that, yeah.
And Amelia had been lifting weights. Like that was just, you know, she had been doing that for a long time anyway. And so when this contest was offered, she was like, yeah, I got this. I'm ready. I can do it. But the adults involved were only counting the boys' push-ups, despite the fact that Amelia had surpassed the boys basically times 2 and was so proud of what she's doing, because she does this beautiful job in her memoir of talking about her internal dialogue of I got this, and also trying to get the attention of the adults who are timing and counting and judging this contest and saying, hey, what about me? You're not counting mine. And and they didn't. They ignored her. They only counted the boys, despite the fact that the boys did not come anywhere close to what her push-ups were. She won. But they didn't even look at her. They kept ignoring her, no matter how much she was physically proving that she could beat them, but also saying, hey, count mine, count me, you know? And my heart broke when I read that, because unfortunately I can relate, but also I think that is the story that has been told to women and young girls for a long time, is you don't count. Even though you're working twice as hard to prove that you do, you don't count. And you can't do this because it's what boys do. And so we internalize those messages. And I think it's lies like that, belief systems like that, that separate us from ourselves. Because you were very connected to who you were. You know, you knew you were strong. You knew you were brave. You knew you could be powerfully vulnerable by putting yourself out there. And you were told by adults who are supposed to be the ones nurturing and guiding you that you don't count. And especially in our vulnerable childhood, middle school years, we internalize those messages. And so I think it's the compilation of all those things that disconnect us from who we are and make us feel like we're not connected to those around us because we don't count. But back to your book, I think this magic of being connected to nature, of being connected to all parts of you, the parts that were wounded, yet beautiful and graceful at the same time that they were wounded, but the part of you that is ferocious and powerful and, you know, extremely independent, like it's all connected. And so I think your book does a really beautiful job of connecting those pieces, but it makes sense, you know, when you say speculative memoir. And just to make sure I understand, it's like you're braiding, great use of that word too, you're braiding together the narrative of ancestral ties to abuse and addiction with magic, with, what was the third one again? Do you remember?
With the trauma of sexism.
Yes, thank you. The one I just spent 5 minutes talking about. It was right there, but I forgot it. So with the trauma of sexism. So I think
so
that's
glad
really
that came through.
Yeah, it did. It did. Okay, so, how did you do it? How did you learn to combine the magical with the autobiographical?
That is such a great question. I think it was a way for me to explore things in a more trauma-informed way. Like I said, I think the first draft of my book had to be the pain story, but the reality was it was really hard to write. It was really hard to relive those moments in enough detail that I could describe it to someone else. And ultimately, not all of those passages are in the book, but I also wanted to find a way to write about it that could be more restorative to me, that wasn't just the hard stuff. While I was writing it, I wrote these palate cleansers. So they were stories of my son and me, and just fun, goofy, also heartwarming stories that I thought were going to be in between the chapters. I thought they would be these little stories that happened in between the chapters to help the reader along. And then I realized I really wanted that to be more integrated into the story and not just be this separate thing. So now the stories exist in some form within the narrative, because my son is very much a part of that journey. And he really is the embodiment of healing to me, to be able to parent him in a way that aligns with my values, and see that in his world, he has more possibilities for himself because we can talk about a lot of different things. So I think, to go back to your question, I chose that as just a more trauma-informed way to be able to convey the message, right? It couldn't be all of the things that happened. There were things that happened in my life that I didn't include in the book very purposefully for a variety of reasons. But part of it was self-preservation and self-healing, like I have to be able to read these passages out loud to an audience at some point. And I want to be able to do that in a way where I'm not harming myself in the process. I love this Roxane Gay quote about kind of what you choose to put out there in the universe, where she says, you don't have to cannibalize yourself to tell the truth. And I love that, right? And I had to ask myself with some of these chapters, am I cannibalizing myself? And some of them I think I was. So I took those things out because I didn't want to harm myself in the process, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like, writing in this sort of magical yet very realistic way, part of it was born out of necessity, which I think it's really good that you thought about those things. And okay, so just for my listeners, it's okay to do that. I think sometimes people think when they're going to tell their story, they do think they have to cannibalize themselves, or they're like, I have to tell the whole thing. They don't realize it's like, no, it's your story. You can pick and choose what you're ready to share, and the parts, you can get artistic with it, the parts that you maybe don't want to be direct and specific about, you can find in metaphor. So can I ask you one more quick question about maybe how did you pick like a deer and a wolf kind of as sort of the symbols of, your past self, current, future self? How did you come up with using sort of deer and wolf?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I was a kid, my grandpa had an exotic animal farm, and he grew deer there. He grew lots of animals, but deer were there, and so we were around deer a lot. So I got to see how they behave and how they move through the world. And I think when I thought about my past self, I thought about this sort of vulnerable creature, and yet still a part of an ecosystem. When I wrote Burst, which is one of the early chapters of the book, about my birthing experience, I had labored through 34 hours during a nursing strike, had a very negative experience, and then that ended in a C-section. And afterward, because the nurses who were attending me didn't know the pain policy at the hospital, they withheld pain medicine for an hour and a half after I was drawn and quartered on a table and awake for the whole thing. And so I think as I was writing about that, I said I didn't feel like a mother, I felt like a feral deer. And to me, that image of a deer came to me pretty early in the writing process. That I was thinking of myself as this deer that had been wounded in the forest, dragging blood across the forest floor. And that is quite violent, right? And then I wanted there to be kind of a ferocious part of me that could come out too, because I do feel like a she-wolf. When I'm
You are.
Oh, thank you. When I am going to bat for my son and advocating for him in some way, I feel like a wolf. And it also felt meaningful to me that along the way, kind of these systems or people who did harm, I describe as wolves in the book. And at first it's just the deer being chased by wolves, but then the she-wolf emerges, and I liked the idea of a little bit of that fighting fire with fire kind of thing, that I can be ferocious too. But look at me and how I'm going to restore peace to my ecosystem through my ferocity. I'm not going to try to just scorch the earth here. I'm going to try to make a meaningful narrative come from it and some healing come from it.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful, you know. And I agree. I mean, especially you can look at something like a wolf, you know, people often, I heard on a podcast recently, I heard Mo Goddard is his name, and he's like a tech wizard, you know, knows a lot about AI, like a lot, and kind of how to use it. Like, he's kind of one of those people who looks at like where humanity is headed with their technological developments and things like that, and how to not let them overtake us, kind of a thing, how to use them for the, you know, best, I mean, the well-being of everybody. But anyway, he talks about AI kind of like he talks about Superman, in that he said, you know, we are sort of the product of who we're raised by, but also what we choose to do with our abilities. So he said Superman could be the hero, or he could be incredibly destructive because he was raised by the Kents and he chose good. He was a hero. And I think the same applies, you know, but if he was maybe raised by somebody else or chose to use those same abilities for evil and harm, he could have. And I feel like this concept of the wolf, you know, applies to that, because in some ways they are ferocious predators. You know, they can be dangerous. At the same time, they're also a keystone species, and they work beautifully together to survive. And so I think, you know, depending on how you use, you know, your skills and who you are, to your point about how you're using your narratives to be restorative and making ecosystems, I mean, that's really beautiful. And I think it definitely works, you know, both ways. So I love that you did that too, that you talked about being the deer and the wolf. And I think that's just another healing thing about your book overall, specifically for women, you know, and girls, when we are told this is what you are, this is the one thing, to remind us that no, we are many things. We are vast and powerful. And I think it's great that you kind of included that dichotomy.
Well, and I think that separation from body then leads us to separation from ecosystem, and sort of seeing ourselves as separate from nature. And that has, you know, its own level of harm, of course, that we see the evidence of. But,
Yeah. No, I'm glad you included that detail too, because I think that's been one of the biggest contributors to the mental health crisis that we have now, is that disconnection. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, so now we're jumping into the tough question. So, you know, if share as much or as little as you would like. One of the main motivators for this book was your own experience with domestic abuse and addiction. Are you comfortable sharing, you know, some of what that was and how it contributed to your wanting to write the book?
Well, thanks for that question. I think as I wrote the book, it became clear to me that it wasn't any one individual or system that I could sort of name as the one abusive source in my life, which was both frustrating and a little freeing at the same time. That the experience of being bullied and sexually harassed as a teenager in school was very related to being ignored for my achievement in the evangelical church, was very related to being in a romantic relationship with someone who tried to coercively control what I wore, who I hung out with, what kinds of relationships I had. And then it also was related to the people then, once I left that relationship, who I dated at first. And I had to learn not to look for certain things anymore that I didn't even realize I was looking for, because in my childhood I had seen systems and people who didn't value what I had to bring. So then being in a relationship where someone was harming me in various ways, it didn't seem that out of the ordinary. And so it was kind of normalized in my mind. Although I think at some level I also knew, because I didn't tell people of all of these things that were happening. So to me, that secrecy is a tell that I knew on some cellular level that it was wrong what was happening to me. I certainly don't list out all of the things in the book because I want to protect myself, both psychologically and in my current state of being. But there are some examples I give of a partner who got very upset for me wearing a swimsuit in front of other men, which is a very normal thing to do on a beach, is to wear a swimsuit. But at the time I kind of more bent to that. There's a story in the book about me getting thrown off of a jet ski over and over and over. And that is the hardest story in the book for me to read out loud. Because of how it impacts other people. Because I think when other people hear that story, they understand the harm that was being done in that moment, and it becomes real to me. So in the book, I did try to also give some restoration to myself and hopefully to the reader. After that experience of the getting thrown off of the jet ski, say 8 to 12 times, I don't know how many times exactly, I say what I would do as my 41-year-old self if I could go back and care for my 22-year-old self in that moment. And I say I would whisk her away. I would get her a rental car. I would buy her a delicious sandwich dripping with mayo. I would get her some great chips and a cookie in a cute little cooler. And I would tell her to go get some support through a support group, a therapist, friends. And I would tell her to lose that person's number. Obviously that's not how it played out. But that helps me to be able to kind of say, what would I do now if I could help her? And so there are moments where I kind of talk about my past self, current self, as interacting in a way that could be considered speculative too.
That's healing, though. That's what a lot of therapists recommend too, is talking to your past self, whether that's the child, the teenager, the one, telling them what you needed to hear, seeing yourself getting what you needed in that moment. I know that there's a lot of powerful neuroscience kind of behind that. So that's wonderful that you did that. And you just painted a really powerful picture that I want to make sure my listeners understand, because there are a lot of stigmas around domestic abuse. And I think even today, the common question is, why don't you just leave? Why did you ever do this? And why would you ever go with that person? And the main buzzword that you hit on with both your experience with witnessing cycles of abuse and entering into a relationship with an abusive partner, and even dating people who had some of those tendencies, all of that is related to the buzzword familiarity. And our brains are trained to be drawn toward what's familiar. That's just the science of it. And so nobody wakes up one day and says, I want a partner who's going to disrespect me and belittle me. Nobody wakes up one day and thinks that. It's patterns created over time by multiple systems telling you that you don't actually matter and that you deserve this kind of treatment. And so your brain seeks that out. And it's heartbreaking, but it's so true. And so when it comes to breaking these cycles, like if you really want to help somebody who's been abused, number one, enter into conversations, with them with compassion, but also recognize it wasn't one choice, it was several choices. So as you raise your kids, especially girls, validate who they are, whoever they are, you know, show them that that matters, give them the freedom to be who they are. It's these everyday conversations where our primary goal needs to just be, how can I support who this person is? And a lot of that is just acceptance and encouragement for whatever it is that they want to do. And I mean, like, with, you know, with their lives, with their dreams. And if you know that internally you've got some sexist, racist, whatever it is, tendencies, start, you know, exploring those, working on them. Don't shy away from them, you know, and kind of just let women be who they are, you know. So there's that too. So, I mean, we're talking about, you know, generations of cycles and things like that. But I mean, I just need people to know that, you know, that it really isn't one thing, it's the familiar. And so
absolutely, I'm glad you touched on that, Jenna, because I wanted that to be really clear. There's an early chapter in my book called In the Beginning where I explore ancestral history. And I make an observation about an ancestor of mine who came from Europe, was fleeing war and famine and hunger, and he came as a 12-year-old indentured servant over to the United States, and later went on to enslave people in the United States. And I wanted to live with that paradox of how could someone flee harm, and then in fleeing harm drive a knife into someone else's back, right? To do the thing that his oppressors did to him, to someone he didn't know, but then would have implications for generations, millennia, for this new place where he had arrived, new to him, I should say. So I wanted to put it in its proper context. You know, I don't know all the details of that person's story, but those are the details I know. And I felt like it was important for me, especially as a racialized white person, to say, like, the reality of what had happened in this ancestral history. And that's not the only example, but it's one example I can point to of, yes, we have to see and acknowledge the harm that has been done to us, and also how have our people been harmful to others, and how can we, because all of this is related, right? Racism related to sexism, related to homophobia, related to transphobia. These are not things that are separate from one another. And so I think in my position in the world, which is at the I see myself as at the intersection of a lot of privilege and some oppression. And so I think that does give me a vantage point to be able to see, hey, how can we start to create systems that are more equitable for all people? And also, how can we move ourselves to move in a way that makes that happen and is less harmful?
Yes, thank you for saying that, because that kind of filled in some of the gaps of, like, what I was trying to say in terms of breaking cycles. And I think the biggest thing that you just said is awareness and reflection of the harm that's been done to us and the harm we might be doing to other people as a result, because it's familiar.
Yes.
Did I understand that correctly with your ancestor, that, like, perhaps he was repeating what was familiar to him? Is that where you were going with
absolutely.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's how it happens. And we don't know. You know, our brains are created to be very automatic, and that's to preserve our energy so we survive. But as we evolve, it's like we have this sort of metacognition where we can go in and go, hey, whoa, I'm not necessarily living in a world anymore that's just based on survival. We're reaching for something higher.
Yes.
So what do I do now with that I have these metacognitive abilities? And that, I think, right there is the crucial part for breaking cycles of abuse, sexism, homophobia, racism. I mean, like you said, it's all connected. Primarily it starts with awareness. And part of, I believe that we all have a very powerful consciousness, and if we just get quiet for ourselves with a minute, we know. Yeah. We sense, just like you said, you sense that what was being done to you is wrong. Yeah. We know, it's just a matter of what's listening to us. So it seems like a really good way to work on actually breaking some of these cycles is to develop an awareness of what's familiar to us, whether harmful or good. And spend some time with that. Breaking cycles is really hard. Like I can tell you from experience,
yes.
it is a journey. But it is also 100% worth it, because what you're doing is you are learning to live as your authentic self, which is what we all need. That's what leads to fulfillment. You're helping those you love to live as their most authentic selves. And then what kind of magically happens is when people are living as who they really are and they feel like they have the freedom to do so, they then want to extend that compassion to others. That they don't become arrogant, they become compassionate. And I guess I'm speaking from direct experience of my own partnership that I'm in now, as well as what I see happening with my kids, since I've kind of worked on breaking my own cycles, helping my husband with breaking his. You become something rather divine. And it is hard, but it is absolutely worth it.
I totally agree.
Okay, so thank you for going there. I know that wasn't necessarily easy, but the good news is that we get to jump into healing. So one thing I really wanted to know is, like, how did you get out? How did you get out of this visceral cycle? How did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it just took a few really intense things happening to kind of wake me up from a slumber of sorts. I was in a relationship where I found out that there was infidelity going on, and I didn't know about that. My partner had been having an affair, and that combined with his addiction just made it the last straw. And while that was the worst time in my life, because it felt like such a huge betrayal, it also ended up being its own gift, because I don't think I would have left had those things not happened, so it sounds strange to call it a gift, but it allowed me to see a different possibility for my life. So I think I just had to hit my own rock bottom, to use an addiction metaphor, right? I had to understand that this person could not be there for me. It could not be my partner in the way that I wanted and deserved. And so I left out of necessity for my own wellness. But it took some time, I'll be honest. It took, even after I knew that was happening, I had to go to therapy to figure out what I wanted to do about it. And I remember at the time, and I write about this in the book, that everyone swooped in with their opinions on what they thought I should do. And I had cultivated people around me as a now recovering people pleaser, but at the time I was actively a people pleaser. I had cultivated this group of people who thought that they could tell me what they thought I should do about every little thing. And I started to realize that wasn't actually serving me very well, because I then had this separation from my body and my brain where I didn't know what I thought about things. I knew what other people felt in the room, and then I would kind of go whichever way the strongest person in the room said to go. And that was not serving me. So I went to therapy at that time, and I write about this in the book, but the therapist led me through a meditation where I had to imagine myself where no one's opinions could reach me. I couldn't hear them or see them.
That's good.
And so what I imagined was myself sitting in a chair that was kind of like a throne. There was some yellow light around me, and there was a fence around me. And it was kind of like this little wrought iron black fence all the way around me. And at the time, it felt like that was kind of protecting me from other people's opinions and letting me sit with kind of what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And later, I was swimming, and it just kind of clicked all of a sudden that actually that fence was me separating from that partner. Mm. And that was a very sad and hard decision to make. And it continued being sad for a long time, but now I can see that it just opened up possibilities for me in a way that I wouldn't have had. Now I have the bandwidth to write a whole book. I didn't have that before because I was bending to what I saw as his needs at the time or other people's opinions. And so very slowly I was able to extricate myself from that. And like you were saying, once I had the bandwidth, the quiet, once I had to sit with my feelings, I could more easily access what I thought about things. It's something I'm still working on, but I find the practice of writing a book has been a challenge to me in my, striving for embodiment and understanding my own needs. But then so if I'm writing and I'm all of a sudden really tired, I make myself go take a nap. Or if I'm all of a sudden really hungry, I have to go get something to eat. To respond to my body and sort of see that as priority, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if we have what we need in our bodies, safety and food and shelter, then we can do the higher levels of thinking. But creatively, I can't do that if I'm strung out and not like sleeping or not eating. That's not gonna work for me. So I think that has played out in the writing process as well.
I'm so glad you talked about that, because you reminded me of an episode I did with my husband a couple of weeks ago called like if you feel like you're dating defeat, because we just talked about how when you're working on healing or trying to achieve your dreams, how frustrating it can feel when it's like, okay, just when I thought I had recovered this far, now I've uncovered this thing, or where you feel like you're just not where you want to be. And my theory is that mindset is born out of living in an achievement-based culture, right? Like, sure. I think very much when you live in the United States, it's about our achievements. Like, well, I achieved getting married. Now I achieved getting the house. Now I achieved getting the promotion and I'm done. I achieved the grade. We talked about school. Like, we're sort of taught that everything is just about getting to this end product. And if you don't, you failed. And we kind of deconstructed the whole idea of what recovery means, or breaking cycles, or just growth. And really, we're coming back to the other buzzword, connection. That's what it's about. It's about life. I think the way that humans were meant to live it is about the connections that we make each day. And it can be really hard, especially for someone like me, when you're like, oh, so I have to just keep growing, I can't just get there, and I
haven't arrived yet.
Yeah, I get that, because I feel that too. But it's like, when you see life every day as just about the connections that you make, or about what you can do with what you're feeling and what happened to you every single day, you can see this sort of beautiful vastness that life has to offer, and you see it differently. It's not about like, okay, this is, by the time I'm 45, I'm going to be fully healed from this. You know what I mean? It's not that, because that's not how human beings work. We have this incredible depth to us, and so we kind of just alluded to, no, every day you are making progress. And like you, when you can see certain things not as setbacks, but as something you can now make meaning out of for your higher purpose, that doesn't make them seem so powerful. Yeah. And the beautiful thing about the human brain, though, like speaking of arrival, is one day you do wake up and you realize, oh my gosh, it's been, 6 months and I haven't even thought about that person. Yeah. Or overall, I'm a much more peaceful person now. I've had moments of anger, but they're a lot fewer and far between, and you can see your progress. And so the point that I'm making is I appreciate that you alluded to just like recovery being a process and making meaning out of even things that sometimes appear as setbacks or new traumas or struggles we maybe uncover. But it's like we can make meaning of it all. Recovery is a daily process, and we can experience some rather beautiful things along the way.
Absolutely.
I know I'm getting long-winded, but I have to add one more thing that I've noticed, which is when I see each day, like let's say, you know, I get frustrated and I give in to the anger of the narratives that are being said about me, and it gets me all worked up. Instead of just thinking, oh, okay, well, I lost today, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm escalated in this moment, but I can choose to come back down and think about what happened and why, and then choose the rest of my day to see all the people who are actually in my corner, you know, and I can now look for those connections, and I can do that all in one day. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Totally.
So all of that is to say thank you for sharing the recovery process.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up connection too, because that is something I wanted to make sure to touch on. Was I was never alone the whole time. I might have felt alone, but I was never ever alone. I had very supportive family members who helped me. I had a friend who allowed me and my 1-year-old baby to move in with her. You know, she offered free of charge. And that was such a gift in that time to be able to have kind of an intermediary space where I could go to transition to whatever was next for me. I had incredibly supportive friends who would sit with me while I cried about this, or would offer just any number of things. I had lots of friends send me things just as a surprise. Like one of my friends sent me flowers. One friend sent me a gift card for like a food service. One friend also offered to let me stay at her home with my baby. And those are just incredibly generous things that I don't want to take for granted at all, because it helped me stay afloat in those times. And I still have those friends now. So I think, especially in a chaotic world that can feel so crazy making right now, where we are in 2025, what keeps me grounded is that connection, going to writing group and hearing what other people are thinking, seeing people create things, and going to open mics where they're expressing hope or despair or whatever it is, but people are together and creating things and trying to imagine the world they want. That feels so essential right now, and really at any point in my life was essential.
Yes. Another thing we talk about on the podcast is the reticular activating system, right? And like some psychics will call it also signs. I believe it's a combination of both. So like the reticular activating system is just the idea that whatever you're looking for is what you see. You know, it's when your brain is kind of in the mindset of, you know, for example, like I want to see an eagle today. You're more likely to see an eagle, whether in the sky or on someone's shirt or the back of a truck, because I've seen them there, you know, like just, or something like that. When you're looking for it, you notice it more often.
Sure.
And that applies to the people who come into your life to support you too. Because I think a lot of times if people are struggling to leave maybe a toxic workplace or an unhealthy relationship, or even something as serious as abuse, they might think, well, I know that I'm not going to have support from maybe, unfortunately, their family, or I know I'm not going to have support here. I'm not going to, you know, there's all the things that they fear they're not going to have because a couple people around them maybe have shared opinions that weren't helpful, or who maybe, you know, they think I won't have the support I need. But I'm glad that you talked about all the support that you did receive from people when you left, whether that was somebody helping you to move into their home, or then further immersing yourself in people who were creating rather than destroying. It's like when you take certain steps in the direction of your destiny, or even in the direction of just a healthier, safer life for you and those you love, what Les Brown, one of my favorite authors, calls earthly angels kind of appear, meaning those human beings who want to help you kind of emerge. And sometimes you can find support in places that you didn't necessarily expect. I definitely felt alone in many ways when I left my abusive relationship several years ago, because I had a lot of people sharing opinions about how hard it would be to get custody of my daughter, and then that just wasn't helpful. Like I knew it was going to be hard, but but I got connected to the Tubman Center, which connected me to some of the legal protection that I needed, and lawyers, at a reduced rate and things like that. And so there often is more support than we think, but another thing the brains are trained to do is to look for the negative. But the more that you kind of train yourself to look for the hope or the support or what you do have, the more that you see it, the more that you grasp at it, the more that you actually just have it. And so I'm really glad that you talked about all the people who supported you, because I think that's one of the main things holding people back from leaving situations that they should leave, is they think they won't have what they need. So thank you for going there.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's how we build safety for ourselves, is in community and in connectedness. I think it just serves us to be more connected to the fabric of our community, wherever that is, if it's a neighborhood or a group or kind of an affinity group. Those connections and healthy connections keep us safe and secure as people.
Yes. And even, to your point about joining the writers group and gardening and the bees, it's like the pure joy of leaving toxic things is now we have all this energy to invest in who we really are and the creative beauty of this world. And that's what really makes it worth it. So, once you finally get to a space where you can get quiet with yourself, well, there's healing that happens, but there's also just living that happens. I don't even know how to express the joy that comes from actually living who you are, and being surrounded by people who support that. It's incredible. And
it is.
And I'm glad that you talked about, getting to the writers group, being around other creators, your gardens, the bees, like it's wonderful.
Yes, thank you. It is. The last chapter of my book is called In the Garden of Amy, and in it I kind of talk about that freedom that I find in the garden. I find it very liberating, because the rules that say our society has built up to design us to be separate from our bodies and just produce value, whatever that is, those don't apply in the garden. And when I can let myself fully be in those moments, I talk about a moment in particular where I had just picked my son up from school. It was the hottest day of the school year, and all he wanted to do was go home and play in our swimming pool, like our little, 3-foot swimming pool. And so I filled it up, and he was playing, and he said, "Mommy, come into the pool with me." And I thought about it for a second, and I had all my clothes on, and I just dropped into the swimming pool in all of my clothing. And he was so shocked, but his delight at that too, and me being able to be in that moment with him, I was able to see that above us there were all of these dragonflies flying around. And I realized they were killing off the mosquitoes, which are our predator in the garden, right? And what a beautiful metaphor that I could sit with my son and meet his joy, and then also be protected by my ecosystem from this pest,
That's a really beautiful scene.
Thank
you for
you.
painting that for
Yeah.
us. And dragonflies, by the way, are one of the most magical signs out there.
Oh,
so yeah,
good to know.
like just in terms of connection to the divine and spirits. I mean, that's I've got them on my ring
Oh,
right here
love it.
because they're very magical.
Aw.
So thank you for sharing that piece
Yeah.
too. Okay, so that actually kind of leads nicely into my next question, which was like, is there anything else, because you kind of talked about this a lot, but anything else you've discovered about yourself since leaving just abusive or toxic cycles? Is there anything like what have you learned about yourself that you didn't know before, maybe rediscovered in yourself?
It kind of, for me, it dropped the veil on bullshit. And when I say bullshit, I mean like sort of the white picket fence, 2 kids, a dog, and a heteronormative marriage. Like that sort of idea of what our lives are quote unquote supposed to be. It just dropped it. I didn't have to have that expectation because everyone knew I had just gotten divorced and my life was in shambles. And not really, but you know, in some ways it was falling apart. And becoming a single mom helped me discover that I could no longer pretend to be perfect. Before, I was pretending to be perfect or striving for it as if that was a thing I could ever do, which is ridiculous. And now I see that that's obviously not possible. So why even try? Like, I'm not going to wash the dishes every day, but I am going to show up for my kid, and we're going to work through whatever emotional journey he's on that day. Or maybe I get takeout for dinner and it's not the healthiest thing, but we're eating together. And so I try not to pick apart my own choices anymore. And I try to understand that me doing the best thing for myself and my son is going to get me to the place where I need to be. But that was a benefit of it. And I think also, getting laid off, which I got laid off a couple years ago, was another lesson in kind of dropping the veil. I didn't have to pretend to have it all together professionally because this thing had just happened. But I could enter into a new era where I just kind of trust my voice and I end up now I work with only people I enjoy. Which is an incredible gift to be able to choose. I'm self-employed now. Be able to choose kind of who I work with so that the lessons I've learned along the way about who to perhaps avoid in terms of toxic behavior, it just allows me to say no to certain things and to trust that intuition that I've learned to listen to.
Learning to listen to your intuition, that's really powerful. And I appreciate how you painted this picture of just kind of, life has ups and downs. There's things that we keep and things that we let go. And I think, so in my book, She Death's Reflection, I wrote my kind of magical experience with breaking the cycle of abuse with a narcissist. But I also tied it to overarching themes of just narcissism kind of being the sickness of the United States, you know.
Yes.
And it's it is, you know. And you want to talk about bloodlines and going back, it's like, well, look at how this country was started, right?
Yes.
It was stolen, people were murdered, slaves were brought over to build up wealth for, you know, there's a lot of really kind of cursed things that have happened here. But I talk about how if there's one lesson that narcissists can teach us, even though it's unintentional, it's the danger of a false image. And I think well-meaning folks out in the US who aren't even necessarily narcissists but fall prey to this idea that it's all about the picture perfect, and at whatever cost I will appear as if I have all the things, and you know, never ever address what's going on inside, or also just that maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And that can be a marriage, that can be a job, that can be even, you know, the picket fence, that can be having children. You know, there might be people who had children who didn't actually even want them. And, you know, now there's an issue, you know? So I appreciate that you painted life as kind of this roller coaster that you have to sort of live vulnerably and honestly, because I think that's the only way we can ever truly be happy and healthy. And I think our whole country needs a reset of priorities, right?
Totally.
I talk with my husband a lot about American lawns kind of being a huge metaphor. You want to talk about metaphors
Love
in
this
nature?
data.
Yep.
Let's dig in.
Well, I think it's a huge metaphor for just working the land in such a pointless way. It's like people are obsessed with their lawns and having this perfect Kentucky bluegrass or whatever it is with no weeds, nothing wild, picture perfect, whatever. And how many middle class, upper middle class, or, you know, and like folks put so much time, energy, and money into making their lawn look a certain way for what? You can't eat it. It's not helping the ecosystems of the environment. It looks nice. What are you actually getting from all this work that you're putting into poisoning your lawn, cutting your lawn, making sure it, you know? And I feel like that's very symbolic of American life.
Oh, for sure.
All this work and toil is put into this image, but what are you actually gleaning from it?
Yes.
Are you getting anything of substance from it? I don't know. So I think, I mean, we're getting, you know, really vast with this, but I think lots of things are vast. I think we're all kind of trapped in some cycles of various forms that don't serve us.
I think America is in a codependent relationship with an abusive partner. I mean, there's a concept in Al-Anon of, they call it dry drunk. So a person who maybe isn't actively using substances, but behaves as if they are. And it's just, you see patterns of rage, you see patterns of narcissism, you know, just kind of lying or hiding things. And our current leadership is the embodiment of that. He doesn't use alcohol, but he's using some sort of rage mechanism inside his body, and it is not serving us, any of us.
No, it is not. It is not. And, you know, you could look at it too of like people select the partner or the leader that they think they deserve. And so to that point, it's like, this is what our country thinks we deserve. And it is very twisted, you know, when it comes to even, I mean, now we're taking a direction, but I've talked about this, you know, on here too. Like, it baffles me, the folks who are maybe not billionaires who support that man, because it's like, what about him and his closest relationships and the way he's lived his life makes you think he understands you and what you need?
Or that he's a person you want to embody. None of his family members live with him. I think about that all the time. How unhappy a person would be if the people who are supposed to be closest to you don't elect to live with you. To me, that's such a symptom of maybe who he has chosen to be. And I don't aspire to that. Why would anyone aspire to that? Why would anyone aspire to the kind of greed that is so clearly there and just disregard for the everyday American who is struggling, right?
Yeah, I'm really kind of hoping this is the rock bottom that you talked about.
I hope so,
because
too.
it's like, come on, haven't we evolved past this now? Like, even you could look at the idea of a leader targeting a particular group of people and to unite a country over hate for this particular group of people. You know, it's like, what was the point of learning about the Holocaust? What was the point of studying history only to repeat it, you know?
Hey, on a spiritual level, we are all connected on this earth. So to do harm to a certain group of people harms ourself in the ecosystem. And I feel frustrated that people can't just see our collective humanity and want to do something to better it. And maybe that takes various forms, of course. But to to not see sort of the game that's being played with people's emotions, to blame someone as a scapegoat for their lot in life. It feels so lazy now to go along with that, because whoever that group is, they're humans alongside of us, and we need them to do well in our ecosystem for us to do well in our ecosystem.
Yes. And I think it also comes down to people thinking that they don't matter, that their actions don't matter, and that they don't belong. You know, maybe they're disconnected from who they are. And that's where so much of this comes from. But that kind of brings me back to also what I wanted to ask you, you know, because you've done such a remarkable job of kind of coming back to yourself and developing habits that you're proud of. And I do believe the actions we take every day help build the ecosystem that we all need. And back to our other point of like, the more you learn to love who you actually are, the more you want to extend that compassion to other people. So something that I wanted to ask you is, what are your day-to-day habits for writing? Like, how have you cultivated this incredible skill that you have that does heal the world in the way that we need? How do you do it? What are your everyday habits to write?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I started writing this book in 2023, and at the time I had entered a year-long memoir writing cohort with Carolyn Holbrook, who's now my writing mentor, that we've continued working with each other. And she gave us advice early on to write between 1,000 and 1,500 words per week, to make that our goal. And during the generative process, that was, she said, at the end of the year, you'll have a book, you'll have a manuscript. And that worked for me, writing 1,000 to 1,500 words a week. We would also workshop with other people and get feedback. And then I think in 2024, I kind of had to use a biblical metaphor, walk through the desert a bit with the material, sit with it, understand kind of what I wanted in the book and what didn't belong, what I needed to still write. So I did a lot of additional writing, and a lot of that is not in the book, but it was instructive to me to be able to kind of walk through it all and then see what was there and pick what is part of this narrative. So it took me writing through 2025 a few months ago to understand fully what the book was about, and what was the through line. So then as I'm getting closer to the end of the second manuscript, it's helpful to understand, well, what is serving that through line now? What belongs or what doesn't? Because on a day-to-day basis, I get tons of ideas. So I always have a Post-it note, kind of notepad next to my bed, which is where I get a lot of ideas. And I'm jotting down in the dark notes, and I keep those in a folder. So on the days when I feel stuck or I don't have, you know, an idea of what I want to write about, I go to that folder and I look through my notes and I find something to write about. I also categorize my writing into subject areas. So by now I know, okay, this is the chapter of the book where I talk about my neighbor stalking me. So if this is related to that in my brain, it goes into that Word document. And eventually those things started to coalesce, and I just found myself being drawn to writing about the same things over and over. Often I would go into a document to write something and found I had already written it. So at a certain point, once I was orbiting the same things, it said to me, okay, this belongs here, because I keep coming back to it.
Yeah. That's really powerful, and I'm glad that you kind of went through that process. It sounds like, you know, you've got your Post-its, you've got your documents, you had the way that it started with is, okay, 1,000 words a week, and then that kind of grew into something, and steps. That's what I hear. You know, I listen to a lot of successful like entrepreneurs and things like that, and they talk about the same exact things, that it's like, if you want to write a book or do anything extraordinary, don't go extreme. Don't say, I'm going to write this book in the next 3 months. Start with particular goals, and before you know it, they stack and stack and stack and stack, and now you have this, and now you have a clearer vision of where you want to go with it. And I think that's true even for writing, where it's like you have your vision, but then as you slowly work on it and give the story the time that it needs, it becomes something even more than what you originally imagined. So giving yourself that time and space to let it kind of become is really important, and I'm glad you spoke to that. So thank you. I think my listeners will find that helpful. Maybe they're not necessarily writers, but that step-by-step process of like trying to get a certain thing done, during the week, or noticing what your brain comes back to a lot. There's meaning there. So.
Absolutely. And I think it helps me to notice in my body kind of what's happening that day. So there might be days where I feel like I have the bandwidth to finish a chapter, and so I sit down on my computer and I do that. And there might be days where I don't it just feels different in my body, and I have to do more the business of writing things, which might be entering a contest or signing up for a class or doing some homework for a class. More kind of the right-brained thinking, the business side of things. And it helps me to notice that in my body, to know kind of what I'm prepared to do that day. I lost my train of thought, but you had talked about... Anyway.
Well, I wanted to thank you for talking about the business side of it too, because whenever somebody's taking on a big project or trying to live a new dream or accomplish something, there often are different elements to it that all work together. And I appreciate that you brought up that, well, some days it's writing, but sometimes it's doing a contest, sometimes it's doing an open mic, whatever it is. So whatever my listeners might be working on, getting connected to all sides of what this project or what this dream looks like is really healthy, and they all work together. And again, the beautiful thing about the human mind, especially when it comes to art, is we pull value and inspiration from all of our experiences. And so as you're working on your project, when you do take care of some of those business pieces, it can feed into your project in really powerful ways. So I'm glad that you touched on that too.
And be a source of encouragement. I'm glad you mentioned open mics, because that's absolutely what my brain forgot to say. How helpful it is to read the work out loud to people and see how it resonates in a room. That is incredibly helpful for me in my writing process, to be able to hear what's working or what maybe isn't landing a certain way. Often when I read a piece, I understand what needs to be cut or what's not totally working. It just allows it to sort of take a different form, and sometimes I can revise things in hearing it that I wouldn't necessarily know visually.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that you added to that too, because that part's huge. So thank you. I think I have a couple more things I wanted to ask you. Ooh, and this is a really good one. What advice would you give to your younger self, whether it's related to some of these cycles or writing or life, or just whatever you think your younger self would need to hear? What would you say?
I think I would say a couple of things. I think I would tell her to feel her feelings and learn to listen to her intuition. I would tell her to get on Zoloft earlier.
Yeah.
Because that has been so helpful to me in shutting out some of the more anxious parts of me, so that I can listen to my intuition. Because if you're worried all the time, it's really hard to know what voice is that intuitive voice. And to allow yourself to change your mind. That was advice someone gave to me before I became a parent. Allow yourself to change your mind. And I thought that was such beautiful advice to people in general. Some things work for us until they don't. And when they stop working for us, we can change our mind and do something different.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. I think too often, too many of us feel stuck, you know, and it's like, no, I'm on this path.
Yeah.
I invested this much time, money, and energy into this. Again, whether it's school, relationship, the gym, I don't know, whatever it is, you know, people think they're stuck. And because they made this choice at one point, they can't make another one. So thank you so much for saying that, because we absolutely can change our mind and often need to.
Yes.
Like you said, we need to, because certain ways may have served us for a while, but they don't anymore. Human beings grow and evolve all the time, and changing our minds is part of that. So thank you for adding that.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so I'm going to add a question that I didn't originally tell you about, but I hope you're okay with answering it before I ask one of the final ones. So your book is called Surrender. Can you give my listeners an idea of when it might be available for purchase and out?
That's a great question. Okay. What I'm hoping to do process-wise is finish the second version of the manuscript in the next few months.
Okay.
And then my sense is I'd like to find an agent and then a publisher for the book. That process can take such a variety of amounts of time. But my hope is maybe by the end of 2025, I could have found an agent. And then with that agent, we can find a publisher for it. That process also takes some time. So, and then publishing, you know, it's usually kind of a year and a half after a deal is finished that the book comes out. But I will say, so it might not be available for purchase super soon, but I do share my work very regularly at open mics and through my newsletter, which is also called Surrender, a sometimes newsletter, because I don't want to inundate people's inboxes, but I also want to be committed to sometimes you will receive a newsletter from me. So I know you're able to link to that in the show notes, and people can also find me on Instagram at Amelia Colwell. So it's AMELIA COLWELL. On Instagram, the link to sign up to my newsletter is in my bio. So if folks want to sign up for that, you'll get chances to hear my work or see my work before I have, you know, the whole thing in place finalized.
Well, that's really good news. So I absolutely will link. I can link your newsletter directly.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll link your newsletter because I've read it, and it's really, really helpful for updates on exactly what she said, like where she's gonna be, and then I'll link your Instagram as well. And I have to say, Amelia doesn't just write memoir; she writes poetry too.
I do.
And this woman stirs the room in the best way. Like I can tell you, as someone who's heard her share her work on several occasions, you don't want to miss it. And so even though we have to wait a couple of years for your book, it's good to know that we can still get connected to your other work, because that is just as powerful. So I'm more than happy to link your Instagram and the newsletter in the show notes, because people need access to this.
Thank you,
and then
Jenna.
The good news is they'll know when things become available, because estimations for timelines are important, and you're not wrong in that it can take time, but it all just depends on the agent and the publisher too. So sometimes things come out sooner than we anticipate, so you never know. Well, I want to know, do you plan to write any more books once you're done with this one?
I do.
Okay.
I've caught the bug, so to speak. As I've been writing, as you mentioned, I've been writing poetry, and I've been a poet for a number of years, since college, and find it just a really lovely way to share kind of condensed images and metaphor, and allow the form to not be so precise or exact, and in some ways also be more condensed, so it can be a lot of things. But all that to say, I'm writing a lot of poetry as I write this memoir. So honestly, I think by the end, I will have a book of poetry, having, you know, been birthed into existence. So that's what it feels like the next step is for me, is some sort of way to get my poetry into the world. I was a part of this thing called Red Wing Arts poet-artist collaboration where they take 25 poets and take their poems and then give them to 25 artists, and the artists interpret their poems through an art piece. So that is actually on exhibit right now in Red Wing at the Depot Gallery. It's an incredible exhibit. Just incredible to see the ways that people interpret poetry through art. So that is also an interesting thing that I would love to do again. Just finding ways to collaborate with other artists to have our work speak to each other is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that, because it is beautiful. And
you
know, I mean, to your point about, okay, you wrote your book, but through that came poetry, and now you're involved in this contest where is it painting or drawing that they're doing, or just along with the
any art form, any visual art form.
Okay,
so there are some sculpture, some paint. The one that I was paired with, Catherine Gotham is the artist, and she did a painting of my poem, and she did a spectacular job.
Wow.
It was just amazing to see it in visual form.
Yeah.
Having tried to create these visual images in the poem, and then she got it. She understood.
Wow.
So.
Okay, so that's the power of art. And when you pursue, because I found this to be true with my own writing, when you pursue your passion, whatever that might be, you will find that it naturally lights up other areas of your brain. So if you're going to pursue a dream, whether you're an artist, athlete, entrepreneur, whatever it is, if you're going to pursue something, you will find that you build on it. You start doing one thing, but you learn more as you go, and then you see what you're capable of.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm an author of memoir, but I'm a poet too. Oh, okay, now I can build on this. And I've experienced a similar journey in my writing where I thought that I was one type of writer, but then through finishing that book, other areas of my brain learned and were challenged, and I branched out to different genres too. So it's really cool to see what you're capable of once you just start, and you never know what something could become. So of course I'm glad to hear that you're putting out more work, but I'm glad you talked about, poetry and memoir and all of that, because that's kind of how it works. You start one thing, it builds, and you see what you're capable of.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else that you wanted to speak on that I haven't asked you about yet?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate the conversation today, Jenna. It's wonderful as always to chat with you. So thank you so much. I think that's everything. Or everything for now.
Yeah. No, for now, exactly.
Yeah.
There's always more. There's always more. I don't even know where to begin to express my deepest gratitude for just who you are, Amelia. And I meant what I said to my listeners at the beginning about how you just have this sort of magical, powerful presence whenever you're around, just who you are. So thank you for sharing that with me again today. Thank you for sharing it with my listeners. There's so much wisdom to be learned from you and your journey and everything that you're working on. I know some people are going to be inspired today. So thank you for everything. And I have this lovely dorky exit for my podcast where I thank my listeners for listening, but I also thank them for coming.